So if you want to ask a question, feel free to put it in the chat and I will try and get to it. I don't think we're going to have a formal Q&A at the end, so I will try and weave them in as they show up. Hello, Tyler. It's nice to see you, Voice of God, from the Autism Entertainment Day. A couple things before we get started. I speak quickly. I would like to apologize in advance for that. I will do my best to slow down, but I was born and raised in New Jersey and then lived in New York for 20 years. And I just think it's just the way it is. So I will do better. Lawyer, so. And on top of that, I'm a fast talking attorney. Okay, so I already said to send questions. The terminology, there is not a consensus in the autism community about how to use some of the words, whether it's neurodivergent, autistic, on the spectrum. There are a couple of words that we just don't use anymore at all. I have found that from my travels, the autistic people who choose terminology for themselves tend to choose autistic rather than person with autism or any of the others. So that's what I will be using largely. But I really am trying to be thoughtful about it, and I appreciate if, and I apologize to the extent that I use one that you don't prefer and that it bothers you. But I'm at least coming to it honestly. I'm trying. You're doing great, buddy. Thank you. Thank you, Kellen. I appreciate that. Everybody needs a little boost every now and then, and I appreciate that.
Trust me, we know.
And of course, there's going to be other terminology that I'm going to botch. I'm a person of a certain age, so sometimes I get stuck in my grammar. But I'm trying, and I think that's what we can expect from everybody. Yeah. So I want to start by just talking a little bit about the process of being a voiceover performer from the studio side, the people who are essentially generating the work. So not all situations are going to be the same, obviously, but I'm going to talk about the process, the overall process that you can expect for voiceover in animated television. So we start with the idea. Somebody has an idea, whether it's an idea for a show or an episode or a character in a show, and it gets pitched around by people, and they say, yes, that's a good idea. We should do an episode where, so-and-so goes to the prom and there's some such and such happens, there's a flood. And those ideas turn into characters, and then somebody writes a breakdown. A breakdown is essentially a description of what the parts are, and what they're looking for. There's particular terminology, especially when it comes to protected areas like race and gender and age, and the wording is actually quite careful. As an attorney, for a while, I was asked to review a lot of these things, and so I would read the breakdowns and then sort of offer notes back that said, you can't say typical Italian, for example. That was one that I had to sort of push back and say, why don't you just describe the character rather than lean on a stereotype? And then also about trying to use the proper terminology and developing a special language. So that language goes out to people like Danielle, who then have their roster of talent that they know of, and they will notify people basically and say, or an agent might also get a breakdown. And sometimes Danielle is the person who will send the breakdown, and they will say, oh, I know this person who fits this role or would be good in it. So they send the breakdown to that person and whatever the requirements are. Usually I would think it's a little piece of script that you record on your own and submit. So those submissions end up, or you're just submitting your 1 minute demo that shows a couple of different voices you can do. So some of that is important because under SAG rules, you get paid a fee for one voice. That same fee entitles my side of the equation to 2 voices. And if I pay 10% more, I get a 3rd voice. So budget, if there's a 4th voice, I have to go up to double scale. Scale is in the ballpark of $1,000, depending on what you're doing. And so we, to best spend our money, sometimes want performers to be able to do 3 voices. That way we don't have to hire 3 different actors for 3 full fees. We can hire one actor for 110% of the fee, and that's a better use of our money. So when you submit things, sometimes that's what they're looking for. Can they do 3 voices that sound like 3 different characters? Then the team on my side of things does selects. They get hundreds of submissions. I don't exactly know what the number is. They whittle it down to 10. They bring those 10 to the deciders. The deciders pick either number 1 or the top 3. Then they bring it to the high level decider and they cast it. Sometimes if it's a lower level character, that may not go through that whole process, but that is a process that often happens. So once the bigwigs decide who is going to play the role, they call in me. They call in the lawyer, and somebody like me takes care of the paperwork and the money. Like I said, scale right now, I think for an over 10-minute episode is, I think, $1,140 or something in that ballpark. So just to give you a sense, if you get one job doing a guest role on an animated show, I'm going to try not to use Nickelodeon examples. I always want to say SpongeBob. That's the amount of money you'll get paid. Some percentage of that will go to your manager, your agent.
Just chiming in that some different, also because you're speaking from one network. Different networks have different SAG agreements, so it could vary a bit. I don't want somebody to think they're being underpaid if they're being paid. Like PBS would have a different agreement that, so it's that's the ballpark though, completely.
Yeah, the numbers might jump, but yeah, the point is that if you want to make a living, let's say you've targeted the number as $50,000 a year is enough for you to make a living. That means you have to book 50 jobs that year to make $50,000, and that's not your take home. That's your gross, the amount that you've earned. But just to put it in the ballpark of the folks that you're hearing on these shows, probably do hundreds of episodes a year to try to make their living. It's not animation typically is not super high paying. So that's a volume business. You want to get a lot of work. And then after the paperwork is done and you've signed, you'll do an original record, which is where you come in and you record the script. Typically you come in by yourself. Some people do it from home. A lot of people have a setup at home where they have like a fancy microphone like this and fancy headphones like Danielle's, and they make the recordings in a quiet room in their house. And then you do that original record. That original record is typically used to animate. Animation process can take a year, really can take a long time between your initial record. It comes back, they realize, oh, the way they've animated it, your character seems really agitated. But when you did the reading based on the script, which was the original intention, the character was a little bit more calm. Can you, redo this one line and sound more agitated? Or we've changed the script one or two words. And can you just reread that line? Or there was a pop the last time you read it, which we didn't notice. So that's called ADR, additional dialogue recording. That's also considered part of the process. So, and then you're done. Then they make the episode and it comes out. I guess the last thing that might happen is that sometimes you will get a notification from my side that says, hey, your episode's going to be on Thursday. Here's the official press release, or here's the official information about it. And then you have the option to put it on your socials. So that's a process. They're not all the same, but that's one way they might go. And I thought that would be a useful setup to let everybody know sort of where the process lies and where your role in the process as somebody trying to become a voice actor might come. Somebody pointed out, by the way, that there's a 10% agency fee. If you have an agent, typically, I don't know, Danielle, you might disagree, and you guys might know also, typically you get a rate and then you get plus 10% agency fee, so that let's say your number was $2,000. We will pay $2,200 and the 200 goes directly to your agent. So it doesn't usually come out of your fee. Usually it's on top of your fee, because we want to encourage people to have agents, because we don't want to deal with you directly. The paperwork people. We want to deal with a professional in paperwork. We want you to come in and be creative. We don't want you worrying about paperwork. So I would like to start by
so you have just from a SAG perspective, if it's a union job, if it's a SAG scale, so if it's like that 1,000 ballpark we're saying, then there has to be a plus 10% on it. It can't come out of your paycheck. That's against a union policy.
For minimums.
For minimums.
For the minimum.
Exactly. But if you were, some of these names we have being thrown in the chat over here, like Tom Kenny, you're not making the minimum, obviously. So you have to pay your agent fee out of your total, and that's an agreed upon percent that you have. So don't worry about that. In right to work states, the same thing happens in terms of a SAG minimum as well. Sometimes for non-union projects, an agent will require, including non-union animation, 20% because there's more paperwork and chasing. That could be an issue where it could come out of your 10% could come out of your paycheck and 10% could come out of the production company. It's a little bit more of the wild, wild west. I think broadly what we're going to be talking about here is more so union animation, and that kind of standard. But I just don't want anyone to say like, this is always how I was told it was. There are certain union rules, and then there is what we call the wild, wild west of non-union, which sometimes is a little bit different. Same with like how many voices you get. in a record, how long your session is, all that stuff is different.
Yeah. So I would like to start with Kellen and Analesa. If you guys could take a second to tell us, I guess we'll start with Analesa, how you broke into voice acting. It's a great gig once you get it, but by all accounts, it's very difficult to get into unless you're already famous.
Yeah. Well, for me, I've been doing on camera and voice acting since I was 5. I'm very lucky because I was put into ABA when I was a kid, and that was not great, and I really didn't like it. And so my mom took me to an acting class, and she was like, why don't we try this? And I loved it because since I was a kid, now acting has been my way to understand the world and understand conversations and how they're broken down, how people communicate with each other. And I had a very raspy voice as a kid that people really liked. So they just chuck me in the booth and go, have at it, kid. And I did that in Oregon for years and years and years and years. And then when I finally moved down to LA, I was going to focus on camera, and voiceover just kept coming back and kept coming back. And I'm so glad that it did, because it is, for me, especially as an autistic person, one of the most accessible forms of the entertainment industry, because there are so many things they can do to accommodate us that sometimes are not possible on like a real set. Like sometimes you just kind of have to be like, all right, I'm going to suck it up and, do as best as I can. But with voiceover, there's no reason to do that. I mean, they can only keep you in the booth for 4 hours sometimes even. So
yeah.
I'm grateful and happy that it worked out the way it did. And I'm just really grateful that acting exists, because otherwise I don't think I would be able to communicate as well as I do.
Oh, that's great. Kellen, how about you?
Cool.
Were you doing it since you were a little kid, or did you have that break-in experience?
Yeah, no, in a sense, I didn't really, Fish, did you know that, did your parents tell you that you were like, when did your parents tell you were autistic? When did you find that out? At 5? Okay,
Yeah.
So I didn't know until
let me break it down for you.
So I didn't know until I was 17, because they back in the 90s, they had no idea how that would affect someone with autism's growth. So I thought I was just a weirdo, which I came to terms with. I'm sorry to do that while you were drinking. But I was always drawn to storytelling. They thought I was going to be an author. I thought I was going to be an author. I wasted enough printer paper.
Paper.
But what's that?
Paper. Old timey.
Yeah. See, 90s. But I then in like 3rd grade, I got to be in the school play, and I sort of the spark started. Then in 5th grade, I got the lead, and that sort of started it all right there. Fast forward about 3 years, and this obscure site no one knows about called YouTube was starting up, and
never heard of it.
I know. I humble beginnings, right? But I would find people that were weirdos like me on there. I didn't have a word for it yet, so it was just like, we're the cool people, we're the cool kids table, and we would make videos and voice act in each other's stuff because we couldn't afford to hire real ones. And I sort of started falling in love with it that way. So I kept cutting my teeth and practicing. When I was 16, my dad, also an entertainment lawyer, I thought I was waiting for that to come up. He lawyered me into a Bob Bergen class, so I was the first minor to be able to take one of those. And from there I just kept working with teachers, and then got my big break. And I am.
What was your big break?
That was Funtime Freddy in the Five Nights at Freddy's series, and that is.
How did you get that gig?
That was through a friend. If you start voice acting online, there's this forum called the Voice Acting Club, and that's where I met a lot of voice actor friends that I still know today. That's where I found my tribe, and we sort of kept in contact with each other and kept lifting each other up. I've known like our friend Kira Buckland. I've known her since I was 13. And we would just like send each other auditions we think we'd be good for, and that was a heavily codenamed one. I had no idea it was Five Nights at Freddy's, but yeah, that's how it came to be.
So Kellen, I feel like that's a pretty typical story of anybody trying to break into showbiz, not just voiceover, is that you've got your social group and you're all kind of pushing each other for a long time. And then one of them breaks through and kind of pulls the other ones in or teaches them the ropes or, whatever it is. But I suspect that for anybody that's challenging probably, but perhaps it's additionally challenging for someone who's autistic. To what extent, Annalisa and Kellen, did you find, well, I guess I'm really talking about Kellen's story about having a social group and trying to maintain that, social group and nurture it so that when someone is successful after a couple of years, that other people can sort of have doors open for them as well. Was that a challenge for you in relation to being autistic?
It was, because I really only knew the basics about it. I was a very stubborn kid. I did not want to be told I was wrong. My mom is very patient, and I love her and thank her for putting up with me. It sort of transferred to online, but the fact that all of us were, and looking back, I realize all of us were a bit on the spectrum. I think there was sort of that spark of camaraderie there where fewer words had to be said about it, and we just vibed off each other. But I will say it was tough to navigate when I was doing something wrong, because I wouldn't know unless they explicitly told me. And thank goodness that the early internet was just so blatant. That is a kind word for it. It's a blessing and a curse to have grown up on the early internet, because I grew up pretty quick. But it definitely helped me with my professional and social relationships going forward, knowing how bad it can get and why, and then working off of that.
Annalisa, do you still have a social group like that where you find out about work because of your buddies and stuff?
Oh yeah, it's like you said, it's very exciting to have a group of friends that you're kind of watching each other go up, and one of them will get a little boost and then you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they did that, and then you get the little boost, and it's very slow building, but you're building that community. I always like to tell people, especially as an autistic person, because I've had people come up to me and gone like, how do you network with people as an autistic person? And I go, the only way that I have been able to make networking successful is if I genuinely have a connection with the person. Like, I have friends, like I worked on Metal Lords, which was made by the Game of Thrones producers, and DB Weiss and I just hit it off immediately. He's a huge nerd. We talk about Dungeons and Dragons. We text each other on the regular, and everyone on set is like, we can't get him to talk to us. How are you getting him to talk to us? And I'm like, I'm literally just being my weird self, and he likes it. I don't know. And that's how I found in this industry too, is don't force anything. If people aren't giving you the time of day or they're treating you differently, then those aren't the people you want to be around. Like, you will, like Kellen said, you will find your tribe. You'll find your people who don't care. And especially in voice acting, ambition and like relentlessness goes a long way. So if you find people who work as hard as you do, they will admire how hard you work, and everyone just kind of wants to help each other. That is what's so beautiful about voice acting. Like Kellen said, I'll like help people with their demos, and then they're sending me an audition, and I'm helping them write an email, and they're introducing me to someone. And for the most part, it is a collective group of a bunch of nerds who are weird in some way or another. Like, and the ones that aren't, then you don't gotta talk to them. There's so many of us. Like, you'll find your people that you just click with, and you don't have to you put on any sort of mask or anything with.
Is there a point where you explicitly tell your group, when in thinking about the social group, like the people who are watching the panel probably are churning about like, okay, who would be my group, or how would I find people, or how do I make my own group? But also part of that, and we'll talk about this a lot today, is at what point do you disclose your autism?
With friends?
Just thinking about a social group,
Yeah, with friends pretty immediately, because usually what happens is like I'll be introducing myself to them, and I have a problem with making eye contact and talking at the same time.
Same.
It's a big problem with my self-tape. Sometimes I just am like going on like a very important like rant about something and my eyes are closed because it's more comfortable for me. So I usually am like introducing myself to someone. I go to shake their hand and my eyes are closed. I'm like, hi, I'm Analesa Fisher. And then I go, I'm so sorry, I'm autistic, like with my eyes closed. And usually everyone's cool about it. They're like, okay, that's awesome. Who cares? You know?
Yeah. So I'm going to slide over to Danielle for a second, but I want to make sure that everybody watching knows, first of all, double check that you're muted. And please, if you have any questions for me or for the panel, please pop them in. And if we don't get to them naturally in our conversation, I'll do my best to make sure that they get asked. And of course, if we don't address them, we will have ways to contact people afterwards anyway, so that you can follow up on your questions there. So Danielle, once this, as a casting director, you're an important part of this process. How do you describe your job, to people who are performers, and especially if they haven't been involved in the process for a long time? It can feel sort of mystical that, this audition arrives and then I audition. But there's obviously a lot more to it than that. How do you describe your job, and to give us a sense of being oriented about the process?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm brought on, it depends on the project. When I'm brought on, sometimes it's like when it's in development, sometimes it's when they're ready to, actually start hiring the cast. And I request auditions, and I have the relationships with actors directly, as well as agents and managers, to request auditions, and, different voiceover coaches. And depending on what the project is, like I could go really, really broad with it in terms of who I'm looking for, or if it's a really fast turnaround, or it involves a lot of times with animation, a lot of NDAs. So needing to sign a non-disclosure agreement. So it's, sometimes I can't share the breakdown as broadly as I'd like. And I have to first release it as like boy one, and then have a really like, vague character description and all of these things. So it can be, or I'm told I can't put it anywhere but to these particular agents via email. It can't even be on any casting sites or any social media. So there's a lot of like dictation on what I can and can't do depending on the project. But then other projects, it's like, go wild, like find us the best actor. We're not so concerned. It's not precious intellectual property or something that, we are recasting and there's a lot of sensitivity. So it really depends. And that's why I would say I utilize, like, if you're ready to be auditioning, you should be on the disabled voice actor database. Like that's for sure. I use that regularly. I also use it changed names. It was the PGM list. It's the VGM list now. But anything where you identify as a particular part of a community, that's the Voices of Global Majority, is the VGM list. So anybody that is a person of color. There's also Queer Vox, which is specifically for voiceover artists that identify as queer. All of these are great resources to both hear about jobs, hear about training opportunities. You're in the right place. You're here. You're looking at training opportunities, obviously, and how to get in this business. So I really, give you kudos for that. I think it's really important to be, and I see a lot of people asking about finding their community. Like being here is a great way to find your community and to build community. But I find voice actors all different ways. Sometimes it is like we've kind of alluded to, we need someone who has a lot of experience, or the expectation is somebody that the producer feels is, got some interesting credits to their name and all of that kind of stuff. But often it's really about the best actor for the role. And it's, if it's a name actor that they want, it's a different process anyway. So I wouldn't get in your head too much about that, because I know sometimes when we watch something, we're like, oh, it's a voice I've heard before. But those are some of the roles. And then other roles are people that are getting to audition. And it's a lot of auditions. I know there was, some mention of how many people we hear for a role. I mean, it depends. I just did a role where the network was like, can you start in the US, but we'll probably end up wanting to hear people in the UK and Australia. So I heard 1,500 auditions at least for one role.
So sorry to interrupt, Danielle, but how does that work? So you've got this digital pile of over 1,000 things you have to listen to. How do you filter through them? Do you listen for a few seconds and then skip next if it doesn't catch you?
That was a slow burn of 1,500. It was probably like 600 and then like a 300, so it wasn't all at once. If it was all at once, I would never sit down and listen to all of them at once. There's no way you would have a clear head. I can't listen to a full audition if it's, if they don't catch my ear. Like, that's a fact, but I want to listen to as much of the audition as possible and also have like that, like I said, a clear head. I also have a process when I listen of like yes, no, and then B list, and then maybe re-listen. So I have like different, because if I always put some wild cards in. So, but I need my full scope of what I'm sending before I can decide who those wild cards are. And the wild card could be that they have an accent and it wasn't written that way. It could be that I want to share, it's written as a particular gender and I choose to share a different gender. It could be that it's a particular age. Like, it could be a gazillion different ideas. It could be that they have a really quirky laugh and that might not have been something that was written. So it doesn't need to be something that is in your control. And also a lot of times I'm holding on to auditions for other things, or I'm like, oh, this person's not right for this, but I know I have this coming up. So that's part of my job too, is to always be keeping notes. And, it's a lot of Google Sheets and people that I know have a specific something that might be right down the line. So like this role where I listened to 1,500 auditions, I had just cast something else where I had heard a lot of people that I thought would be right for this role. But no, we ended up finding the person in Australia. And that was a whole process. But, that's part of my job that's really fun, is getting to also like research and get to know agents in different places and how they work. And, there's a different community and a different culture to every part of the industry, which is really, really cool. And there's also like a different level of acceptance. Actually, one of the girls that was in the mix, she was probably the second or third choice in Australia. She happened to be autistic. That was not what we were looking for, but her mom was so excited to see the work that I do with this community and connect with me, and was just like, yeah, she's never like had a role where she booked anything that was autistic. They don't really have that here, so kind of learning what the disability culture is in different communities is something I also get to kind of tap into through my job.
Yeah. So one of the questions is about performance. So we'll get to that in a minute, but I want to slide over to Kellen and Analesa. One of the questions I wanted to ask, the first thing you'll see with a role is the script. Do you have any experiences in receiving a script and requesting that they change anything in relation to autism? For example, if the line said, "Oh, I have," it's funny, I don't even want to say one of the terms, but if they use a term that is outdated to refer to autism, and you might want to respond and say, "Gee, you should correct that." Like, that's a broad example, but do you have experience with that kind of a thing? And how comfortable can you feel offering that kind of feedback?
I have no shame. I have no shame when it comes to it whatsoever. I was actually just on set for a movie that was really well written. And I thank this director for being just the sweetest human quite possibly on the planet. I'd show up almost every day and go, I have some notes about the script. And she'd laugh. And I would just go, okay, what does it say, Analesa? I'm playing an autistic character. And there were things like, it's something that unless you've lived with the experience, you don't really get. Like, there are a lot of people who try to write from a place of research instead of a place from living. And because of so much of our media around autism is, for lack of a better word, stereotypical, like showing one view of it instead of this beautiful spectrum that is autism with all sorts of different people. Like in this particular movie, one day I showed up and there was a joke that was made about boobs. I'm playing a high schooler. And I look at her and it was like the line was, I don't understand why boys are so obsessed with boobs. And she goes, Analesa, what's the problem? I go, maybe in middle school, I would not have known why boys are not obsessed with boobs. But as a 17-year-old, I think I would know why boys are obsessed with boobs. And it was, she laughed, but I was like, it's important to me because autistic people are often very infantilized. And I don't want to go there. And it's very important to me that we don't go there. And again, most lovely human on the planet, she goes, well, what do you want to say then? We'll just change it. She goes, okay, change it. What do you want to say? But yeah, I have no shame in it whatsoever. It is one of my life's greatest missions to try and usher in more autistic characters where, like we talked about before we got on the Zoom, that are literally not just being boiled down to they're stimming in the corner and can't do social situations, because yes, that is one very, very small part of it, but we are whole people as well.
Yeah. How about you, Kellen? Any experience with rewriting?
If there it just, after a while, it sort of just becomes second nature to, I don't really work in the live action world as much yet. I would like to, but I do dubbing a lot. And when I feel like something doesn't fit, I'll read it like I'm thinking, like how I'm thinking it will fit. And they'll be like, oh, they'll either be like, oh, that's better, or please follow the script, or something like that. And there's only so much control you can have over it in certain spaces. Some are very precious about the script. So if it ends up going that way, I just sort of write it off as something I won't end up talking about later. For the most part, like if it's a bigger character, then usually directors and script writers are very ready and willing to hear my thoughts on it, being someone with autism. So I'll read through it and give them my thoughts on it. What you brought up before, there are still people who use the word you're alluding to, and or at least I believe you're alluding to.
The gentleman's name.
So I'll kindly, let them know why that's not something we do anymore. And usually they'll be like, oh, I had no idea. And they'll change it immediately and everything will be just fine there. But
So people are asking about agents. And so Danielle, I just wanted to see to what extent do you think it's important to have an agent as a manner of breaking into the business?
I mean, it always helps to have somebody who's getting access to breakdowns and has, access in general to get more jobs. But it's a really hard time in this business right now. There's a lot less content being made. And with that means there's a lot less jobs, and agents have a full roster of people that they're trying to find jobs for who are already on their roster. So finding an agent is really hard unless you have what I've found recently. And even so, sometimes it needs to be a really big job, but finding an agent is easiest when you have something that you need negotiated. So if you have if you audition, and sometimes it can be a small thing. Like I had an actor come to me recently who had a Wondery series that he booked on his own, and he was desperately trying to find an agent to help him, negotiate this deal. And the agent response was pretty much like, we have people like him on our roster. This is not that, it's a podcast. It's not that much money for us. We're going to pass, even though it was like automatic money in their pocket. So just know that like, that's how challenging it is right now. But having an agent is always a great thing, but that doesn't mean that you can't find opportunities by self-submitting. And that's the biggest part, though, of finding those opportunities is having community, because that's how you find most of the opportunities if you don't have an agent out there. So, I'm sure that Annalisa and Kellen can kind of speak to that a little bit more as well. But like what I hear from other actor friends is that there's like all of these like Instagrams and Twitters where things are released that if you're not following, I didn't even know that was a thing until maybe a year or so ago, but that's a great way to find jobs in addition to looking on Actors Access, Backstage, and being a part of, the different resources like the Disabled Voice Actor Database where you might get things emailed to you.
Yeah. A question just came in for Kellen that I'm just going to read because I don't want to forget it. Kellen, how did it feel jumping from voicing an indie game character to the main villain of a mainstream anime arc. Was that stressful or was that intimidating? And then a separate question is, how do you deal with autistic stress in your work? So the question is largely stress related, and one is creative and one is autism related. So I feel like that's a fair question to ask, because one of the topics we want to hit is accommodations that you can and cannot ask for. So why don't you start that off?
For sure. Well, jumping from that to a big main villain, it was certainly, it's always intimidating. You know, you want to do your best to bring justice to the part, especially if, at least for me, being on the spectrum, I want to make sure I'm bringing all the emotion that people are hoping for and expecting for this part. And as I've been told, and as I feel I've done a good job of that so far, thank goodness. But there's always the stress, of course, that you won't. So how I deal with that, I have fidget toys that don't make much noise. I'll have like squishy balls with me, and fidget spinners that are like so well oiled, some of them don't make noise. So even if they do, I'll just do it in between takes and make sure, you know, always make sure you're doing something with your hands. Sorry, what was the last part of it?
And then the last part is just generally
stress.
How do you deal with stress? But I think it's pretty clear to everybody that there are stresses that maybe are additional for people who are autistic, especially in these kinds of environments. So what kinds of accommodations? What kinds of accommodations do you feel comfortable asking for when you go into a recording studio, or when the issue is how much time do you have to prepare, or what time of day, or how long the session is? What kinds of accommodations do you feel like are okay to request, and which ones do you try to work out on your own?
Yeah, that's exactly. In the car, I was looking at the questions. I'm like, yes, that's exactly what I want to talk about. For a lot of people that I've met with autism, ADHD comes hand in hand, either as a diagnosis or just sharing the same symptoms. So it is really tough for me in the morning to get myself going, because I'll just keep getting distracted with stuff. Like I'm sure everybody here knows it's like completely free of will. But I feel like it takes me a bit longer to become a functional human in society. So I always do try to get an afternoon or evening session for that reason. I justify it by saying, I'm going to give you a better performance if you schedule me then, and you want the best thing for this product, right?
That's a great way to put it. Yeah, that's. I mean, I feel like I would listen to that if I was on the other side of that conversation.
Yeah, collaboration is the name of the game, and also I just ask them to be as blatant and just like not hold anything back. Just say what you're feeling. Don't try to sugarcoat it, because I'm not going to get it if you use a bunch of euphemisms for something. It needs to be a bit more up. Okay, pitch, energy. Just say I'm sleepy right now and I can amp it up. But the last thing, I'll ask them when I'm reading something, especially for dubbing. What I will like keep my eyes mostly on the words, and that's what will come out of my mouth. I'm like,
I mean, at least it froze on a good frame. Like, it's a nice smile and he looks happy. Kellen, you froze a little bit. So Analesa, let's jump to, oh, sorry. Oh, Kellen, you froze for a second, so we missed that. But let's jump to Analesa, and it just asked the same question. Like, what accommodations have you asked for that you feel like were helpful?
Yeah, well, because of ADA, my go-to rule for me and all my friends who are autistic, when they ask me the same question and are afraid to ask for accommodations, I always say, unless it's something that they need to completely alter about the way that you're recording or anything like that, you're entitled to accommodation. So don't ask, tell. Like, I will just bring stuffed animals into the booth with me because, like Kellen said, that's a soft thing that I can stim with. It isn't going to make any noise. I will just take my shoes off because I do a lot of like tippy tapping sometimes with my feet, or like I sit a lot during my sessions because my legs don't always work great, and I'll like be banging against the chair not knowing. And like some people might think that's weird, gross, keep your shoes on. But I'm like, no, I'm taking them off. Like, and I just tell them that I'm going to do it. And then unless it's something that is going to completely alter things, like you are entitled to things that are going to make things equal. And also, like Kellen said, give them the best performance from you. I'm also someone who I am very blunt. And so I've had directors before, like, give me direction into a line and they'll tell like a whole story or something. And then at the end they go, does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I go, no.
I am that kind of person.
Can you bring it down to 2 sentences for me?
Yeah, or I'll just go, can you tell me some other way? And listen, as a voice actor, a line read is like death, right? Because it means you're not doing your job right. But I have asked for line reads before, and I will say, I don't think I'm understanding the social implication of this line. Can you give me a line read? And they will, and I'll go, oh, okay. And then I'll do it.
By the way, Analesa, can you explain what a line read is?
Yes. So a line read is like, usually for voiceover, you get a script and it'll be on the screen when you go into the booth, and maybe you'll get art, and it's your job to bring this character to life. So usually your director will give you context, like, okay, you're just buying something from a shop. It's nice, it's friendly, it's not too overdramatic. And you might take the line like, oh, could I get that soda can back there? How much is it? And if they don't like how you're doing it, they may give you a line read. And a line read is literally them essentially saying it in the cadence and or tone they're looking for. So they may go, no, Annalisa, that's too friendly. We're looking more for something like, oh, hey, can I get that can back there? How much is it? You're over it. You're exhausted. And so then you can hear that line read and go, oh, okay, I understand now what you're trying to say if the words aren't making sense. Because it's also my job as an actor to make sure that we get what we need to get done in the time frame they have. If they schedule you for a 2-hour session, they don't want to be trying to explain every single line to you for 30 minutes. So it's always better to just be honest. No, I have no idea what you're talking about. Can you please try to word that in a different way? Or if we get to like take 3 or 4 on a line and I'm still not getting it, could you give me a line read? I don't think I'm understanding the social implications here. Thank you so much. It's like you got to work, they're going to accommodate for you, and you also got to work with them a little bit because time is money.
Yeah.
That's really helpful. I think that's really great comments. Yeah, Kellen?
Oh, I was just going to minimize what I said while I was frozen. In the accommodations thing, sometimes a good halfway point between them just blatantly reading the line for you and you doing it is I'll ask them to italicize or bold the words that they want me to emphasize because I'm like Will Ferrell in Anchorman. If it's on the teleprompter, I'm reading it, and I'm reading it that way.
Danielle, I wanted to ask you a question that has come up a couple of times from Tyler and from other people is the question of whether autistic performers can expect to be cast in non-autistic roles. And there's something that's going on in my part of the business. Really, it kind of came to a crest 3 or 4 years ago. But the idea of authentically playing roles, and often that has been intended to be inclusive. For example, if there's a character who's supposed to be of Korean American descent, they'll really go out of their way to find somebody who's Korean American to play the role. But if but that also might feel like something that excludes someone else from being able to play that role. When it comes to autism, I don't know that there's any particular standard to be expected. I would guess that autistic performers are not precluded from playing non-autistic roles, and that nobody's even really thinking about it. If you're the best for the role, you'll probably get the job. But maybe that's not true. Maybe it's there is something about there being more restrictions on who can play which roles. And I don't know, I'm curious, Danielle, from your experience, how does that impact autistic voice actors looking to be able to audition for as many different kinds of roles as possible?
I mean, I'd also be very curious to hear, just based off experience, what Analesa and Kellen experienced. But I know for me, I've cast very few roles that are written as autistic for voiceover. I see autistic voice actors for all roles. That's a double-edged sword. I mean, we expect an autistic voice actor to be competitive with a voice actor of any that's neurotypical. And there are access issues, both from, accommodation issues as well as training and a lack of an interest from certain reps to work with someone. I mean, I had a pretty big autistic actor. This was on camera, but somebody come to me recently and said that they were dropped because their agent said, I can't work with you. Like, you're a lot. And if you had a manager, I would work with you, but this person can't find a manager. So it's like, she's very talented, but there's, not a communication interest in figuring out a communication style that works for this person, even though they've booked before. So, there are those barriers that exist. And again, it's another double-edged sword. There is on-camera representatives, agents that will represent actors with disabilities, and they have their own divisions, but that doesn't exist for voiceover. So the good thing is that these actors that do, that are autistic are going out for all roles. And if you're with a rep, they think you are, competitive with all of their other talent. So you should feel that's great. I mean, and that should be the point of view, but it's a little bit of a, it doesn't always behoove all actors. It doesn't do the best. It doesn't service everybody. It means that you have to be competitive with everybody. And I'd say there's a handful of autistic roles that come out every year, and there are enough great actors. And this is talking about on camera and voiceover. There are enough great actors that exist that are part of this community to cast it authentically. Like, it's not going to be hard. I just saw that like Geek Girl was announced on Netflix and that they cast authentically. Like, there are great actors who are autistic. I think we've made that point. But the point that needs to really be made, I think, is that autistic actors can voice all roles. And that is still an uphill battle, but I don't think Analesa and Kellen sit at home and audition for autistic roles very often.
I wish.
That'd be nice.
Those are the best auditions, because you're like, oh my goodness, I can finally drop my mask and myself, and that will be enough. Oh yeah, we really only get, oh my God, I think last year it was 3 autistic roles, maybe, and that's female. I'm non-binary, but my voice is female, so I can't even speak to how few Kellen probably gets. But I mean, the hardest part for me, I'm also disabled, and so when I came to LA, I found a manager who was essentially willing to keep all my secrets to his deathbed and make sure he can work around whatever we needed to work around, because I told him, I said, I have friends who are disabled and who are autistic, and their first thing that they book is disabled or autistic. And that is the only thing that anyone will ever cast them for ever again. And you get stuck in that box. And there's a good reason to be in that box, which is that it's awesome and it's authentic representation. But the problem with the box is that there's about 3 of those roles a year. And everyone who identifies as that is going to go out for those roles. And so I was very lucky to have a manager who believed in me and was like, I think that you are more than that. I don't think that you deserve to be defined by it. And I booked some awesome roles. And when we got on set, disclosed my disability and my autism and things that I would need accommodation wise. And I'm like, you already hired me. It sucks. And now you have to deal with it. But they were all great and they didn't care. They were like, well, all we've seen of you is your auditions and you're a great actor and we wanted you for the role. And then as I started stockpiling all that stuff, I've in the last couple of years even have just like told my team, I think I'm ready to like let the entire world know more about me and more about the struggles that I deal with. And it's meant a lot to people. I mean, I play a disabled character in a video game and I get messages every day that are like, the fact that they cast this authentically for a video game is insane and it means the world to me. So it really is like a double-edged sword of, like you said, when do you disclose and how do you do that? And we have a big problem right now in this industry of like putting people in a box and saying, this is the box you live in now. Have fun in that box. And that box is fun. I love playing autistic characters. I love playing disabled characters. I love playing things that are authentic to me. but we don't get enough of them to make a living. So
Yeah.
it's a hobby, I guess. It's a struggle. It is. It's not a fun place to live in right now.
But yeah,
we did get a question about. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to speak to my experience with it too. In the 90s, a lot of it was about a lot of it kind of unfortunately became shame based. I grew up in a community that wasn't really accepting of new things. So with that, I feel like the original impetus for acting was becoming something I was not. And as I learned to accept myself, I still kept that. So I love myself, but I love also being things that I'm not. And that has turned into just I don't get autistic characters too often, but because of that, I will make the characters that I do book, some of them, if it works, I will make them autistic. Like Sun and Moon in Five Nights at Freddy's series. They are very beloved by the autistic community, and I did my best to give them like vocal tics and just a lot of sensitive indicators that they could be on the spectrum as well.
It sounds like Tom Kenny is doing the same thing with SpongeBob literally today.
And I love that. I saw that tweet. I was like, yes, it is a superpower. Absolutely.
So we are winding down on time. So I'm so sorry to interrupt, Kellen. I just wanted to sort of point that out. I want to make sure that at least before noon, which is about 5 minutes away, each of you has had the opportunity to offer a piece of advice to somebody who's a young adult, who I think is largely going to be our audience, who would like to break into voiceover acting. What do you feel like is either an important piece of advice that maybe would have helped you as you were breaking in, or something that you, in your observation, has been the most valuable part of trying to break in, which is really, I think, the point of the meeting. And I would like to ask all three of you. I'll start with Analesa, I guess.
Okay. Oh goodness, I'll go first.
Unless you want it, Kellen. Did you raise your hand? Was that what's going on?
No, I was gesturing to.
Just gesturing.
Okay.
Hoping that you would receive an idea as an answer.
I wound myself. I would say it's going to be such a cliche, but accept yourself and use that, because the uniqueness that only you know is your greatest selling point. Only you can be you. And
what a great point.
Even if you think there's nothing about you that's unique, I swear to God that's not true. So yeah, just keep being you, and that'll raise your chances tenfold.
Wonderful answer. Analesa?
I guess on like a similar note, we see the world in a different way, and there is a superpower to that. Don't let anyone tell you any differently. And also, you don't owe anybody anything. So you can tell whomever you want, and you don't have to tell whomever you want about anything. Your autism doesn't define you on days you don't want it to, and it does on the days you do. It's whatever you need. But if you love acting, you love communication, you love understanding the way that humans interact, which is still a mystery to me, but I'm learning, then you will love this business, and it will bring you a lot of joy.
Danielle?
Yeah, and I've seen there are a lot of questions about disclosure. Also, accommodations, like to go kind of back to what Kellen said, I want to know when you're going to give me your best work. So as a casting director, we're your ally, we're your advocate, and I'm going to always advocate for you to work when it's going to be best for you, when I'm going to get the best performance out of you. I want to know from you when the best time is, what your accommodations needs are. Those are things that I ask. So, it's up to you when you share anything, like Analesa said, but just know that a casting director is an advocate for you, is always an advocate for you. And our job, the best thing for us is when we find the actor. Like, that means our job is done and my paycheck comes. I don't get a paycheck until I find the actor. I might get like part of the paycheck, but I don't get the full paycheck until the job is cast. And that's just a fact. So finding you, if you are that actor, is so important to us. So you're never a problem. You're never a thorn in our side. Like, we need you to be that great actor and be that solution to our problem.
A piece that I'd like to offer is the reason you're on this call is because you found something that you love, that you're really interested in, and it's important to do it. So you may imagine that you need to do it on SpongeBob or on Bob's Burgers or something, but you don't. You can do it in your bedroom. You can do it for yourself. You can do it for your friends. You can share it online. If you have trouble with tech, which often people do, whether autistic or not, you can find people who can help you with that. You can make a social group where 4 of you decide that you're just going to take some script of some show that you like and you're going to read it to each other and practice your voices and make a thing that you enjoy. The reason you're interested in this is not because you're trying to make $1 zillion. It's because you think voiceover is cool and it's something you enjoy watching and wanting to be a part of it. So be a part of it. Don't worry about whether you're doing it for Paramount or Disney. Just do it. Get on YouTube, get a camera. These tools are everywhere. They're more available than they've ever been, and they're only going to be more available. You can make your own thing. You can have the joy of doing it, and without worrying about the level of where you're doing it. And everybody has to pay bills and stuff like that, absolutely. But a lot of the people who end up paying their bills still started out, working in Starbucks and doing it at home on the side. And the doing it home on the side is joyful. Try and appreciate that while you have it. When you're doing things on your own, you can do anything. You can play Spock. You can play whatever character you want. The greatest. You can play Wonder Woman. You might not ever get that opportunity professionally, but if you just go out and do it on your own, you get that opportunity. So engage in the creative part of it and enjoy it for what it is, without sweating so much the professional stuff. It may not come. You can work at it for a long time, but enjoy making it. Don't not make it. Make it. So we have gotten basically to the end of our time. Natalie is the woman who's sort of managing the call. I don't know whether it's just going to stop at noon. There will be a recording made available to it. I encourage you to stay. Judy is on the text, and she says she will email the link later. And we'll make sure that you have access, hopefully, to the chat, because Danielle has been doing the Lord's work in that chat room, answering questions and stuff like that, which is fantastic.
Nice,
I want to thank Kellen and Annalisa and Danielle for being a part of this. I want to thank Judy Utah for organizing Autism and Entertainment, and Natalie for helping out with the tech on this. And I appreciate all of you guys showing up and kicking around these ideas and starting your own community. The community that Kellen and Annalisa were talking about, your group of friends. Maybe it can come out of this kind of a meeting. So if there are people who you see in the chat that I don't know, reach out to them, see if you can figure it out. Set up a meeting. Set up your own Zoom where you chit chat about it.
And people exchanging information. That's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I don't know, that's part of the fun of it. That's part of the joy of why people are trying to do it in the first place. So thank you, everybody. I don't know. I'm going to call this meeting over. I'm going to start to applaud. And then whoever wants to hang out, I guess, I don't know, maybe there's still going to be a conversation. We'll see what happens. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm going to do it this way, actually. That's the way they do it in my kids' school.
That's the way to do it.
In my kids' school, they do it. I love that because it's not so noisy.